What was it like for you to cross over from oil and gas and electricity to the sustainable side?
No, that's a very good question, and it's a very pertinent question, I think, that a lot of us have had to deal with. Yeah, no, of course, I've spent the greater part of 27 years financing, energy projects across the value chain, and in particular, starting off with conventional energy projects, and upstream and midstream oil and gas operations and power, conventional, and then moving into renewables. I think the interesting aspect of this is all of us who come from the wide spectrum of energy backgrounds have a role to play in furthering the sustainable energy cause. We have skill sets that we've developed, over this period of time in terms of looking at risk and opportunities inherent in energy projects, whether it's conventional or so forth, that we can bring in to help further, to help develop the sustainable energy space. And I guess one pretty good example of that is to understand really energy markets and what makes energy markets from a supply demand perspective work. And having that fundamental understanding really, would help a lot of sustainable energy projects, in this day and age that are moving away from subsidy-based regimes into market-based fundamentals. So understanding those from a conventional perspective helps.
What's kind of that relationship between traditional oil and renewable over in your part of the world across the pond?
I think we've all been aware of the role that big oil has had to play, or big energy is it's called now, has had to play in the energy transition. They clearly have a key role, enabling role to play within the transition. And I think, and this is not a reflection or a judgment call on our friends across the pond, but a lot of the European energy majors had already picked up on the idea of what is the cost of doing business in conventional energy, what is the cost of carbon, much earlier. And they adopted this and priced it into their activities much earlier, certainly since 2015 and the Paris Agreement. Then they signed up, the likes of, the Dutch oil major, Anglo-Dutch oil major and so forth, Total and BP, etc. They all signed up to the idea of pricing carbon because they realized that, we were now in an intractable pathway towards energy transition. So they've been pretty much realigning their strategic objectives, from that period onwards. And we've noticed that in the way they've interacted with, the financing space as well. It's just ramped up over certainly the last 18 months into an epoch-changing event for them and their shareholders. But they've always been on the periphery of it. And we need them on site. It's going to be very difficult to try to reimagine and change the energy systems that we operate in right now.
What's the rest of the globe's view on how U.S. is pursuing renewable energy?
Yeah, look, I can't speak to the wider community. I can only speak from my own experience and certainly my perception. Clearly, the U.S. has been setting the agenda in terms of energy consumption, as has China, for many years on the conventional side of things. But I think what we're seeing now, as we move into the transition, is actually the role the US has to play, particularly at local level and not only at federal level. There's been a lot of focus on federal level with the change of administration, but we see at the local level already a lot of engagement in the transition, in particular at state level. And of course, in states such as Texas, you've had certainly the largest penetration of renewable technologies such as, wind power for many years already. It came out of the idea of providing some type of, energy, confidence in having your own domestic source of energy at the point in time when geopolitical events dictated it. But ultimately, it has resulted in real sustained, support for that transition. I think from our perspective, at Victory Hill and, my own observations, the US is a picture of a developed energy system that we've seen that requires more work involved for it to transition. We're talking about grids and the level of investment required, so forth, to upgrade grids, on a statewide and federal level as well. That requires a lot of investment. And I don't necessarily think a wholesale overturning of the grid system is the right way to go. So therefore, the US presents good opportunities for people who want to invest in distributed energy schemes. And we're seeing distributed energy schemes where the source of energy supply is co-located with load centers where the demand is, as a neat way of trying to address the challenges you have in upgrading grids. And the US is a very good example of that.
From what you've seen in projects you've been a part of across the globe, where are we at technology to get this thing closer and make this thing happen sooner rather than later?
I think the US is still a key actor and promoter of renewable energy globally. We see this through, the traditional OEM businesses that supply turbines, wind turbines, etc., and turbines for CHPs globally. But we're also starting to see the US also take a leadership role in terms of storage technology, in particular battery storage technology. That's where we see you guys having sort of large-scale battery storage technology. But also we're starting to see now other types of technologies come to the fore with US sponsorship, including other types of storage. And we're talking about gravity-based storage technology. We're talking about liquefied air storage technology that comes to the fore, where they're basically providing a solution for longer duration periods than batteries currently provide. So we're talking about medium and low duration storage, which is really important in terms of firming the grids of the future. Now, clearly, China took on the advantage role in terms of cheapening the cost of production for the likes of solar panels, and it's become very commoditized in that space and whatnot. I think the key to unlocking sustainable energy in the future is not only the commoditization of pieces of kit, but is also the intellectual property that comes with putting solutions together for microgrids, for distributed energy schemes, and so forth. And I think that's where probably the US has a key advantage as well. Yeah, look, I mean, so Victory Hill's an interesting example of what not to do during the global pandemic. I mean, basically, you're originated in a large Japanese bank. 4 out of the 5 founding partners, including myself, originated from, and we worked together internally as a special situations group addressing the concerns of our integrated energy clients and providing capital and advice. We spun out really in Q2 last year. It took us a couple of years to try to, given that we had senior leadership roles, to try to negotiate an exit on good terms, and we did. We were very much driven by the fact that we wanted to connect with middle market developers of sustainable energy projects globally more meaningfully than we could do within a large industrial organization. We felt that independently managing a fund was the best way for us to achieve that. So we spun out in Q2 last year, a group of 5 managing partners. We all turned to our better halves and said, you know what, there is a global pandemic, but I'm actually going to leave my job now because I believe in sustainable energy. That clearly has some type of resonance in some sectors of society, but in the home it's a little bit more of a complicated issue. But everybody was incredibly supportive. People believed in the vision, and we haven't looked back since. Essentially, since pretty much just over a year.
What's been the biggest surprise since you guys all partnered together for Victory Hill? What's been the biggest challenge?
Biggest surprise that we had was the reception that we got from investors as we raised our first fund, which is a public listed fund. It's called Beach Global Sustainable Energy Opportunities PLC. It's listed on the London main board of the London Stock Exchange. Really undergoing that investor outreach and understanding the appetite that investors have for sustainable energy and sustainable projects in general. That was pretty phenomenal. Given that we had all transitioned from other parts of the value chain, including conventional energy, seeing the real appetite that investors have for this sector was really quite pleasing. I would also say that one of the challenges was also related to the investor outreach as well, which is to do with the idea that investors tend to have cultured themselves to have a very simplistic view of what sustainable energy means. And ultimately, to the untutored mind, sustainable energy may mean just renewable energy. We believe renewable energy is too small a canvas to play in. The whole sustainability issue is bigger than just renewable energy. It needs a bigger canvas. And really the canvas we chose as our anchor is the UN Sustainable Development Goals, which couples both the idea of addressing climate change, which clearly is to do with renewable energy, with other important factors for the global society, including access to reliable and affordable clean energy, looking at liberalization of energy markets to create jobs and better industries for communities, etc. These other factors are not just related to renewable energy. So that's what we felt. We had to educate our audience, to access capital by saying, hey, it's not only a renewable energy story, it is a sustainable energy story, and that's much bigger.
Since you see the picture all around the globe, and we hear the word energy transition all the time, is that those 2 words, energy transition, have a different meaning in different countries? Is there relatively the same meaning all across the world?
That's another interesting question. I think energy transition may mean something different in Asia than it would do in a developing country or a developed economy, should I say, like the US or Western Europe. I think Western Europe in particular, when we talk about energy transition, just more broadly, people think of it as just purely the end goal, which is renewable power generation. And they think that's what the energy transition means. I think it has a wider meaning and a wider context in still developing economies where they have to meet, the challenges of providing, access to reliable energy to their populace, as well as meeting climate change objectives as well. So that's really what the true meaning of transition is. You want to transition from where we are now to the end goal. And that's much more meaningful to developing economies than to developed ones, essentially. I'm not so sure if I made that point clear, but that's my perception, certainly.
A lot of people throw that word around, but I truly feel like they don't understand the meaning, that they're transitioning from the old oil and gas ways to the new sustainability ways. I think there's so much in between there. I don't think everybody views it quite the same way.
No, absolutely. And I think transition also implies that there is a process involved, that you can't simply switch off the tap and expect to continue as we do now with 90% of what makes up our houses. Ultimately, you still need to have all these products around the house or whatever, but you need to manufacture it in a much more sustainable way, in a decarbonized way. So that act of decarbonization is implicit with energy transition. It's not simply just about flicking a switch and thinking everything is now just renewable, full stop. Well, then, how do we get access to what makes this society tick at the moment? It is a period of transition and decarbonization, in my opinion. I think fundamentally, as we're doing an outreach to investors, what we're saying is, how much of a sustainability impact can you make if you participate in a highly saturated market for renewable energy, for example? I'll give you one good example. In the UK, there is a lot of capital that has been spent on new renewable power generation over the last 2 decades or so, particularly in terms of offshore wind in that technology. There's billions and multi-billions of pounds that have been dedicated to that. But in our opinion, putting on another 2 gigawatts of offshore wind, what impact is that making in terms of global sustainable energy objectives? I would argue very little, because not only are you not addressing sustainable and renewable energy impact elsewhere in the world where it's needed, you're actually putting on more instability in the UK energy system by just concentrating on renewable power. Clearly, you need to have renewable power in the future, but you also need to balance the grid. And at this point in time, balancing the grid means if the wind doesn't blow or the sun doesn't shine as bright, there is still some dependable source of power to ensure that people get supply. Because we can't live our lives when, if the wind yields are low and yet at the same time you're having a cold snap, we can't get access to electricity. That's absurd. That is anti-sustainable, in our opinion. So our way of approaching the subject is not to join the queue to invest another 2 gigawatts of offshore wind. What impact does that make? We would rather address the imbalance issue. And you can address the imbalance issue through a number of technologies, both here in the UK and also in the US, including storage, including energy storage solutions, including ways of perhaps using transition fuels like natural gas to provide the firming electricity you need on the grid, but also capturing the exhaust from the natural gas through CO2 carbon capture and perhaps reusing it in another product, because it goes into Coke, for example, it goes into your carbonated drinks and so forth. So looking at it in a more unique way will create a greater impact than just saying, I'm just going to invest in renewable power generation.
When you discuss the offshore projects in the UK, in the United States, we have all kinds of subsidies to help that developer be able to afford to do that. Do they have subsidies in those other countries and in the UK specifically for the offshore projects?
Yeah, so it started off as a series of direct subsidies that have now moved into what we would consider more classically as financial hedges that have been offered by the government. So contracts for differences. So, in the latest rounds of wind auctions, you have offshore UK. The successful tender for that concession would win a CFD for a particular capacity. So in the UK context, they are still supported by a form of government support, essentially. That's evolved from straight up subsidies into a guarantee of a minimum return through contracts for difference, which is a kind of like a hedging product, essentially, that the successful bidder for an offshore wind concession would actually win over the period of their investment. So they are assured a minimum level of return for that. That also allows those projects to be bankable. And given that these projects are really, really large, I mean, we're talking about, a 2 gigawatt offshore wind farm, closing out at maybe 10 billion sterling. These types of developers want to get leverage, and this allows them to get leverage. So yes, there is government support still.
Where do you stand on hydrogen?
There's been a fair amount of discussion around hydrogen. It's very, very topical. A lot of people are looking towards it. We know a lot of investors have asked around what's next for hydrogen. It's clearly been touted by certainly the media and sections of government, etc., as some type of panacea for our energy system moving forward. I personally think hydrogen is a very good idea. It draws on conventional principles of combustion technology that we know from conventional energy, but it uses a feedstock that is, essentially, can be essentially completely renewable. You can start off by actually recycling more conventional feedstocks, more conventional oil and gas products, whatever it is, into hydrogen, which is probably the less preferred route. But ultimately, you can create hydrogen from, for example, air. Coming in. So I think hydrogen needs to be invested in. I think the key piece of hydrogen as we see it in the UK context is what is the end market for hydrogen? Who's using the hydrogen and how is that market being supported? And in the UK context, really, there's two primary uses of hydrogen that we can identify that has been touted. One of them is to do with power generation, ultimately, and spiking the natural gas grid with hydrogen, replacing the natural gas grid with hydrogen as one factor. The other factor is actually to use it in as transportation fuel. And I think in order to make those types of projects investable, really, the government needs to step up to provide a clear direction and clear support for the evolution of the transportation sector using hydrogen and the industrial sector using hydrogen. If you don't have that, then you're really going to be stuck with very dislocated hydrogen using industries in industrial clusters and the majority of society not benefiting from it. It does require government leadership. Where is that technology? Clearly, many developers who are touting a particular technology, solution to it, don't think it's matured enough for widespread investment. I think there will be key clusters of investment being led by large industrial groups in order to integrate into their existing operations, but I don't think it's there yet in terms of widespread investment. We have our eye on it, specifically to see where there is opportunity for us to invest, but I don't think it's there yet.
So from a consumer level, you're thinking probably we're at least 5 to 10, maybe 15 years away from it being a part of the mainstream consumer level product.
I would say that's probably a reasonable assumption to make.
How much is renewable as far, whether it's wind, solar? What's the status right now in the UK as far as, I know you already talked about offshore wind. What's the rest of it look like?
Broadly speaking, renewable technology offers around about 25-30% of the energy mix in the UK right now, which is pretty significant.
Absolutely.
Consider the total energy mix. And I think what raises as well is the prospect of, greater intermittency being a factor on the grid. We've seen that actually. We've seen that in real time. I think it was in December going into January, we had some real cold snaps, but the wind yields were relatively low. So the national grid, the operator here in the UK, had to lot more dependable, unfortunately, more pollutive sources of dependable power, like coal-fired generators at a premium. And we thought that's just it's the most unsustainable thing you can think of. You're investing in renewable generation, but you still have to call on coal. We shouldn't have to do that. And I think the key to unlocking that within the UK context is really the greater, evolution of storage technology. And I'm not only talking about battery storage, because battery storage technology is being more widely deployed in the UK context. What we need to get is storage technology that addresses the longer periods of time, the medium and long duration storage. And in that way, then you can start firming up what we call seasons, meaning events beyond just one day. So it could be low wind yields over a week, a month, whatever it is. You can firm it through longer duration storage. And I think that would be the game changer from that perspective.
Is nuclear the bugaboo word in the UK as it is here in the United States?
Yeah, I have to say, over the last 12 months, the UK government especially has been dithering about, what they do and whether they invest in the next generation in nuclear capacity. Clearly, there is a lobby that sees nuclear as the correct complement for a sustainable energy system. Personally, I don't think so, because, whilst I think that power generation from nuclear is clearly not, carbon intensive, I think the means for which you get the feedstock, which is the uranium, etc., is possibly not as sustainable as other sources. The UK government obviously acknowledges that, and they have a fleet of nuclear power stations that are basically becoming decommissioned over the next 5-10 years. The issue is whether they invest in like what they consider as micro nuclear power plants, as it were, something a bit more rinky-dinky. But these types of facilities take a long time to come to fruition. From the idea itself onwards, and there's a lot of risk in terms of project commissioning of these types of systems. So I think there's a big demand as to whether or not they will, renew that nuclear fleet. It's no secret that we want to grow the portfolio. We want to grow, our assets under management. We think that we have proven track record within this 18 months of actually raising capital and going on to deploy that capital. So we're going to be focused for the rest of this year of, fully committing the capital that we've raised, and perhaps going to look at raising more capital as well. We want to grow the overall book. We think there is space for this because there is a lot of demand for this type of capital in the international, sustainable energy space. So that's our mission. Our mission is to grow the capital, deploy more, support more developers looking to develop these types of sustainable energy projects, and perhaps, in the medium term, look at supporting them at an earlier stage, prior to ready to build stage, which is where we come in, generally speaking, at this point in time, looking at it perhaps in the development stage, supporting developers during development stage in another strategy, perhaps. That's really what's on our agenda.